Everybody, this is Eyal from Daath, and you are watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 260 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I'm here with Eyal Levi from the almighty Daath. How are you doing today, man? Thanks for coming on.
Very, very good, man. Thank you for having me.
Anytime, anytime. So, kind of the format is I want to do a rundown of Daath's discography as well as I want to talk about the new album, but take me back to young Eyal Levi. So, kind of growing up, what were the first bands that got you into metal and what made you want to start playing guitar?
First bands that got me into metal were Guns N' Roses, Megadeth, Metallica. Uh, if I'm thinking back clearly, it was those three bands for sure. Um, and the you remember those year and a half in the life of Metallica videos?
Yeah, I remember.
Have you seen them?
I think I've seen them
Okay,
on YouTube.
that
They're pretty badass.
yeah, so when they came out, I was it was the end of middle school and there was no YouTube or anything like that. So that's all there was that because you could only find out about bands almost nowhere, like through Headbangers Ball or for like the 5 minutes they'd give a band or through some magazines. So these were your only window into that world. And that window was awesome to me. Like it was awesome. Like I didn't realize that Metallica were like doing something that like no other bands could ever dream of doing. In reality, it was just that was my view of what it meant to play guitar and do metal was like that was the template. So it looked awesome, and that was what inspired it.
Yeah. And so I was like doing my research. So I think before Doth, you had a band called Dirt Nap. Like I'm always curious about that, like, because I don't think nobody ever talks
That
about
was
them.
Dot.
Oh, it
Yeah,
was
well, no,
Doth.
that yeah, we changed the name because there were lots of other dirt naps. So we would not have been able to trademark the name, or which we wouldn't have been able to get signed. Or I knew that if we were going to get signed, any real label would do a trademark search and they make us change our name. So, so I just kind of decided to just take care of it
Yeah,
before we had fans.
nice. And apparently, 'cause like the name Doth actually is a Hebrew for knowledge. So so what is sort of
Abyss.
like yeah, so what is how like the meaning behind the band name? I know it's the most typical interview question, like, oh, how'd the band name come to be?
Well, there's several meanings for that word, but we went with abyss. So a lot of people think it means knowledge, but it means abyss. And uh, the thing with metal band names is that even in those days, they're like all taken. So, so I wanted a band name that meant something cool, but also would look cool on a shirt that you could read across a room. That was super simple. It ended up being you get some funny pronunciations of it, but it's not hard to read. And I know that that's kind of like that's like the opposite of some genres or whatnot, but I didn't want to have an illegible logo. I wanted to have a logo that you're at the back of a room and you see that logo and you know that logo and it looks cool and it means something cool. That I was never happy with the first iterations of the logo, but the one we have now, which we got in 2010, I love is how I always wanted it to look. But like I always just wanted a name that like was just like a statement, like one one syllable statement, simple. So yeah, that was it. Like it checks off lots of boxes.
Right. And then sort of like eventually you started playing around, of course, Atlanta, and then you put out your first album, Futility, in 2004. So what was sort of like the thought process going into making the full length Doth album?
So Futility was like a collection of Dirt Nap songs that so Dirt Nap there's an unreleased Dirt Nap demo which I'm considering putting it on Bandcamp at some point. Uh, it's all the Futility songs, but actually way more extreme versions. Like for some reason, Futility came out not as heavy as those. I don't know why, but the thought was to make a record and to try it and get signed and like do it for real. So it was like we didn't want to just put out a demo. We wanted to do our best to make an album and get the show on the road and start moving towards it becoming not just our basement project, uh, turn it into a real band. So, um, the music itself, though, was Daath has always been, I don't want to say experimental, but like boundaryless with where we'll go musically. Uh, we've always brought in lots of other types of influences and sounds, and we'll always do that. And in those days, though, and I've talked to like friends of mine about this sort of thing. Like I had Dave Davidson on my podcast, and I remember we talked about this exact thing that in your younger years, people might think that you're more experimental uh and you lose that over time, but that's not it. In your younger years, you're trying to find who you are. You're trying to find your voice. And if like you're actively trying to find your voice, it means you're trying lots of different things. And so that is by like virtue of who we were and where we're at, like that record is pretty all over the place because we were just trying a bunch of different things out, trying to figure out what the sound of things was. So like that's kind of how I see it, is like it's a very exploratory record of trying to figure out our sound.
Right. And of course, this year does mark 20 years of Futility. And I know we have the new album coming out, but is there a chance we can get a celebration of Futility somehow? Maybe throw in some like deep cuts in a live Daath show?
I've thought about it. I've considered it. Like we used to play um some of them live, like Placenta. I've thought about it. Like the thing about Futility that blows my mind, man, is some people have told me that I should bury that album and never let it see the light of day. Like people who I trust. And I can see why, because I think so, some people think that there's like a new metal side to it, which to me there wasn't. To me there was. I always thought that was weird. Like people thought that we were like a new metal kind of thing.
Yeah.
I never understood it
Yeah.
because that
Yeah, because I know at the time when you formed, like new metal was sort of like at its peak with
it
like
was.
Korn and Slipknot, Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park, shit like that.
And I love Korn and Slipknot, but that wasn't what it was about. We just like liked groove, and we still like groove. And we had electronics in it. So I think the the metal scene in Atlanta was not very kind to us back then. It was a very extreme oriented scene, and we got a lot of hate and like called a new metal band and all this stuff. And so we were advised by people who helped us out a lot in our career, um, like a lot, like people who changed our lives basically, to just bury that record at that point in time, because there's a weird perception about it. So over the years, though, there's like this group of our fans, old school fans who love it, who have never let it die and like who keep asking for us to put it on vinyl. Like it's their favorite album. So it just kind of blows my mind because like to me, the Futility, something happened in the mix of it to where it didn't come out nearly as heavy. Like the guitar sound isn't like distorted enough. And it's like, but maybe that's what makes it unique or something. But if you hear the original demos, they were way heavier. So to me, Futility is like not that heavy compared to what it should have been. And I was told to bury it, and we got a lot of shit for it. So it blows my mind that 20 years later, it's one of the things that we're asked about the most.
Yeah.
So it's really cool, actually.
Yeah. And what was sort of like the touring like for Futility? Did you like play outside of Atlanta for the
Only,
first time?
pretty
Because
much
I remember
only.
watching you all on the Garza podcast, and you tried to like play like outside of Atlanta as
Yeah.
much as possible.
Yeah. Because Atlanta was So that changed, right? So the Atlanta scene got nicer to us over time. Um, but at that point in time, the Atlanta scene was not cool to us at all. And so, like, you don't want to go where you're not wanted. And also wanted to build a perception of us being not a local band, of us being a touring band, because in those days, uh, labels cared about that big time. If you were able to tour without a label and figure it out independently, it mattered a lot. Like that was a huge, huge thing you could do in order to get a label's attention back then. So I just felt like that's what we should do. That's what we should do. We should do it from the beginning. Is if we want this to move quickly, we should be doing that. And instead of putting our energy into playing a local show and selling tickets and like put that energy into playing outside, even though it might be a little more expensive, it'll probably lead to better things. It's a better investment in the future. And it was.
Yeah, and of course the Atlanta scene has definitely a change from when y'all started. I mean, I live in Georgia. I'm like 35 minutes north. So how does like the Atlanta scene now differ now then versus how it is now? Because there's like newer bands like Cloak and Withered and so many other bands like and Left to Suffer even killing it now.
Well, Withered, man, they go back. Like we go back with them. Like that we were unsigned at the same time, and I always remember them being fucking sick.
Yeah.
Like, like they're great. They were always one of the good ones. I thought was like, and they were always so cool. And back then it was Zoroaster. They were also really cool to us. The Atlanta scene has gotten more open-minded and better. Like, because there were only a few really good bands back then. Obviously Mastodon were the kings, but outside of Mastodon, there weren't that many good bands. It was very few and far between. I think now, like, there's a lot more good bands, and just like metal in general is a lot more open now to like genre mixing, or because you're into black metal doesn't mean you don't like anything else anymore for the most part, or there's less of a barrier between the genres, and I think that the Atlanta scene seems a lot more supportive of bands than it used to be. Not just it seemed like back then they would only be supportive of a band that got bigger,
Yeah.
um, like clout chasing or something.
Yeah.
It seems now like the Atlanta scene is much cooler to bands just based on music alone. It's a much better place
Yeah.
from my
Everybody's
vantage point.
matured a lot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think metal's changed. It's like it's a less negative place than it used to be.
Totally. And then, of course, you pretty much were playing independently and stuff. And then eventually you got signed to your first label, Roadrunner Records. So, how did Roadrunner find Daath?
Through James Murphy. I
And I
think.
had him on here last night.
Oh, well, yeah, he showed us to Monty Connor. And the reason that I brought James Murphy in to mix the Hinders, the original version of it, was because even though I had a studio and I could do it, I felt like what we needed was something that was better than I could do. Because I had written some of the Hinders, I mean, music like that song of them, very nice. That's the Roadrunner version of the Hinders.
Yeah, I got this used CD store a while back.
Nice. So there's a version before that, the James Murphy version. And uh, like so, I like wrote Ovum, and I just knew that like if this sounded good, it would do something for us. And so we found James Murphy and brought him to Atlanta to my studio, and he mixed the Hinderers. And my hope was that he would like it enough to want to shop us, and he did. And he got Roadrunner interested. Like he sent it to Monty, and Monty loved Ovum. He hit me up because of Ovum. And it, luckily, because we had already been doing all that touring, Like we had been doing those things that I figured a label would think was good. Um, so we had been doing that a lot, and it paid off because when Monty called, like we could already talk about the fact that yes, we've like toured regionally, we've done all this stuff. Um, Prosthetic also got interested at the time, and so I wouldn't exactly say it was a bidding war because Roadrunner is in a different class when it comes to budgets. But Roadrunner isn't the only offer we got. But like I wanted to be on Roadrunner from the get go.
Yeah, and of course, Roadrunner had was like the star of like all those old school death metal bands like Obituary,
Yeah.
Suffocation, and stuff, and even like the metalcore movement with like Killswitch and Gauge and Trivium. Yeah, like I definitely feel like Roadrunner's evolved, but now it's just like they have like freaking Theory of a Dead Man and Nickelback. I'm like, how did they go from heavy to like weird
Well,
shit?
they had those bands back then too. So what happened? What the thing with Roadrunner now is that those like Monty Connor and that whole era of people are gone, and a lot of them are at Nuclear Blast now, actually. But but that was the other thing was Monty. He's the guy who signed all those death metal bands in the '90s, and he also signed Slipknot and stuff. And so I always saw him as you know one of those people, kind of like Brian Slagle or something, like one of those people who helped create the metal scene, and not just in one genre, in multiple genres of metal. And to have him be the person signing us was you can't argue with that. So yeah, Roadrunner,
Yeah.
hands down.
And what is it like working with like a label versus like work doing your stuff independently?
Well, in those days it was different because you didn't have as many avenues in those days for doing it yourself. You can do it yourself a lot easier now. Um, However, there's something I think is really important for musicians to understand. Even though you can do it independently, doesn't mean you should. The people that I know who do it label free, like do it all themselves, they're a very unique type of person who is as much of a like super organized business person as they are a musician, really good musician. And somehow they're gifted at like being really organized, like meticulously organized, and are able to context shift really well from like now I'm working on music, now I'm doing spreadsheets. If if you're not that person and that person's not in your band, don't don't try to be independent because there's too much to keep up with. You're gonna crash and burn. So like a label is a really good thing because there's a lot of work involved in putting out a record. They come with a lot of clout. They can get you a lot of press. People see you differently. They interpret you differently. Doors open for you. They don't make you big. That's a misconception. They don't buy fans. Like no one can buy a fan, but all of the admin stuff and clout stuff that really helps bands out, a label will provide that. And for us, it was a huge, huge springboard. I didn't think we'd last more than a record with them, but that was fine because it changed my life. Like my entire career uh took a different turn after getting signed with them. So, I think it's a great thing.
And then next album is The Concealers, which in my opinion, this is probably my favorite Daath album. And of course tomorrow will also be the 15-year anniversary of this album. So what was it like kind of like going from this to this?
So Concealers, contrary, lots of people don't know that that's also a Roadrunner album. Um, at that time, we got licensed to Century Media uh, because Roadrunner, they just couldn't prioritize us at all. Like we were so small compared to what they're used to dealing with. Like Trivium was one of their smaller bands, to give you an idea of like where their standards were for sales in those days. So they loved us. They really did. And they wanted us to succeed, but we were going to be like the bottom priority always at that label. But they also didn't want to just drop us. So they licensed us to Century Media for that record. However, it was still a Roadrunner budget, and Monty Connor was still our A&R guy. And if you look on Spotify now, you'll see that it's Warner. It's not Century Media, it's Warner. Because Concealers is a Roadrunner album. Um, but the thing is that the the way that the thing I said earlier about Daath always being uh willing to go in any direction musically. So that doesn't mean that means that if we don't feel like being orchestrated and bringing in synth, we don't have to and we don't want to. If we do what we want. And on that record, uh our energy was put into doing something kind of like Countdown to Extinction or something. Like something where it's just like the most meticulously tight, just like guitar driven metal, like just straight up metal album with like really sick songs, really great solos, and the creativity and the focus is in just making it into like this machine, I guess. And so yeah, all the time we would have spent on like getting a crazy arrangement, we spent into making it just like this well-oiled unit. And so it's like the same level of creativity. It's just is what we were focused on at that point in time. Um, and we wanted to make a statement as a guitar band too, because it, I felt like we were overlooked as a guitar band, and that was like a big thing for us. And like everybody ignored that. So we felt like we need to make a statement as a guitar band, um, for by and for guitar fans, uh, and it was cool. Like it it's a bigger album than the Hinderers, um, and I think it's a more focused album than the Hinderers, and it was our first time going to the studio together as a band and like living at a studio and just like making an album like the way that I would see in those movies of my favorite bands where they're living at the studio for a few months. Like that was we got to do that. Probably will never get to do it again, but at least we got to do it once, and that's what that was. It was really cool.
All right. And then, of course, your last album, which was the self-titled, very quick turnaround. So it came out like a year after the Concealers. Did you start writing for the self-titled right after the Concealers came out?
Well, the thing is, the Concealers was done long before it came out. The licensing and this is where a lot of the momentum for the band died, and where things started to take a bad turn, leading to us eventually going on hiatus. The licensing to Century Media took a year, and it had been done for a year. So by the time it came out, it had already been like totally done with for like 14 months. Um, and 14 months of us just sitting there losing momentum. So by the time we did self-titled, it it was a long time after we finished the Concealers actually. Um, but self-titled is kind of like bad memories and a bad time for the band. Like that, we were very in a very dark place, lots of hate towards each other, and we kind of just knew, like we knew this was the end of the band. And so we joked about it a lot that we're not going to do this again. Like this is it. Like party's over. So and you can kind of hear it on the record. It's the most pissed off record. It's super raw. And it's my least favorite record and it's our fans' least favorite record. But I will say that the record's very honest. Like the aggression and the anger and just like the raw vibe of it is where we were at that point in time. But it's the one record I kind of see as a deviation from what we kind of because it's still we still did our thing,
Yeah.
but it's a negative.
Yeah, because I'm always curious because anytime when a band does a self-titled album, it's always sometimes usually like their first album. But when I see it like somewhere like later on or in the middle of their career, I always feel like that was sort of like a change or like a new start for a band. Like, what was sort of like the reason for the album being self-titled?
Um, it was I think that it was because we didn't see it as like the same lineage as hinderers and concealers for whatever reason. And it's such a like it's such a good representation. I mean, all of them were, but like that album was uh, a representation of where we were at that point in time, and that's the only thing that made sense. Like the lyrics are like 1,000% personal about the darkest shit. Um, and it just didn't seem like any other. It didn't seem like there was any other title that fit. Like that album is basically us telling you uh exactly everything that we would never want to share with people in real life.
And then of course after the album, y'all kind of went on the hiatus. So during like the hiatus, what were you personally like doing in the meantime?
So I produced bands for a while. I went to Audio Hammer for a few years. Um, like so I've been producing for a while at that point, like
Yeah.
10 years.
And what got
So
you into producing?
Daath, I wanted Daath to sound good and didn't want to go to local studios and sound like shit, basically. No one knew how to produce metal like in on the local scene in those days. It was so I figured I better learn how.
Yeah. And
That's it.
and do you ever notice like any and is there like a difference between like producing like other bands' music versus like producing like your own stuff?
Yeah, it's way harder to produce your own stuff. I don't recommend it.
Yeah. And then
It
of course eventually like Doth got back together in 2022 or so. Like what made you all decide to come back and how'd you get to find like everybody like Krim and Raph and all them?
One more thing about what I was doing during the time off was I started URM Academy and Riff Hard. URM Academy is known for Nail the Mix most prominently. Um, oh, those are online schools for metal production and metal guitar playing. But when I decided to bring the band back, it was I wanted to bring the band back several times during the hiatus. It just didn't happen, but I tried a few times. That time, I decided it's happening no matter what, and you know, with whoever's with me. So even if no one's with me, it's happening because I'm sick of waiting. Um, I was never happy about the hiatus, and I just got to a point where how much longer could we wait? You know, like we're gonna do this. What we're 60. Like we have to do this, and it didn't work out with the old lineup for whatever reasons, and so those guys are some of the most amazing musicians on the face of the planet. They are a very difficult group of dudes to replace. It's not so simple to when you have dudes like that. Uh, and especially when you have fans who have been waiting for those dudes to come back for over a decade, it's not so simple to just replace them. So we had to replace them with some bad motherfuckers, basically. But like, couldn't just be great players. Like, that'd be great players who are also great writers, who also have something else going on, who also are really cool people, and who are very cool with how this band works, and who are just naturally musically in line with it. That's a lot of boxes to check off. But the dudes we got check off all those boxes, and Krim's like my favorite metal drummer, at least top three. Like I think he's
Love
one of
his YouTube videos.
he's one of the best, one of the absolute best. But like his style though, there's a lot of great metal drummers. His style in particular is perfect for what we do because he's very creative. He he has a lot of groove, but also a lot of power and a lot of speed and a lot of technique. Really good writer. Like he hits hard as fuck. He's like perfect for this band.
Exactly. And I can't wait to see him on Wednesday day with Septic Flesh. It's going to be awesome.
Oh yeah, for sure, man. They're so good.
Oh yeah. And now we have the new Daath album called the Sealers, the
Decievers.
Deceivers. Yeah, I get tongue tied. But
That's
then
okay.
then we have new album, The Deceivers, which comes out on May 3rd. So what was sort of the writing and recording process like for it and how the whole thing came to be and that good stuff?
Writing process, well, some of it was exactly the same as always, like me just sitting down with a blank screen in front of me and a guitar and losing my mind for months at a time. So that part was the same. The thing that was different was obviously new people. But like I was telling you about the new people, that them being good writers, great writers, and like that understood how this works and who are musically in line with this vision, that's a big part of it because that meant that having them write and taking their input and uh, really collaborating with them as a unit was easy. It was super easy. So when I'd get to a point in a song where it's like, I don't know where to take it further, or like, all right, we're done with my initial idea. It's ready. It's ready for Crim. Or um, every once in a while, I'd have one that's completely done, like Hex Unending, or almost completely done. But it was I'd get I'd get as far as I could, and then it would go to Crim, and then he would basically do his thing, or he would tell me something's not right, or we need to change this in this part. Please give me something else that's more along a certain line. And his suggestions were always magical, man. Like he made the song so much better. It's the same with like Raphael and Jesse. Like they have great feedback, and then when they change parts or add parts or write stuff from scratch, it's just top notch, man. And it just fits. That's the thing, is it's not like gluing on some like appendage from another human on there or something. Like it fits. So it was very collaborative. It was, still like the main writer, but like it's a lot more collaborative than it used to be.
And musically, did you wanted to pick up where you left off after the Self-Titled, or being as it has now been 14 years since we had any new Daath music, it's almost like a fresh new start for the band?
Well, I consider it more like where like a if you like take futility and the concealers and the hinderers, um, it's like supposed to be an evolution of those of that whole lineage of things. Self-titled not so much. I mean, maybe with how like technical it gets, but we always got kind of technical. But it was meant to be like the next step after the concealers, or self-titled if you want to consider that. But yeah, 100%, uh, it needed to sound like this band, like definitely an evolved version of the band, but still this band. So you can still hear riffs that will remind you of like Subterfuge or From the Blind or whatever. It it still has the DNA of this band. It was not supposed to be like some different band with this name.
And pretty much with the so far with the singles that we heard, like No Rest, No End, Ascension, Hex, Unending, Ding the Silent Foray, and Purified by Vengeance. Since how does that the sound so far from what we heard? How does that compare to sort of like the other albums?
Um, Better. Uh, it like so the I've always wanted to work with Jens Bogren, first of all, as a mixer. Like I actually tried to get him on the Hinderers. So uh that has been a long-standing goal of mine because I heard Ghost Reveries and the way that he was able to layer all these different sounds and make them sound unique and like classy, yet still heavy. Like I heard Ghost Reveries and was like, I want to work with that dude. And so like this sound, I think it's a lot bigger than the other records. It's a lot deeper than the other records. Um, and there's a lot more going on. but it's still just like epic metal with crushing riffs and like really catchy parts and insane instrumental sections, lots of orchestration, lots of guitar fireworks, insane drumming. It's kind of like the stuff we've always done, but just on a little bit of meth, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you sat down to record the Deceivers, was there sort of like any like sense of like nostalgia or any sort of like old feelings like coming back to like we're making like a new Daath album again?
Um, I don't know. Yes, like I can't believe I'm doing this, but at first it was more like I was as I was getting my playing back, I was hunting for stuff that was unmistakably Daath. And then once I would find that, um, it would just be really clear this is a Daath riff. Um, but it didn't hit strike as like, holy shit, we're doing this again until I went to Sweden for the mix with Jans. Like once I was there at Fascination Street Studios, it was like, wow, okay, this is crazy. I can't believe that that this is happening. So then that's kind of been the vibe this whole time. Like since I got like the vinyl in my hands, like us talking right now, all this stuff. Like it's wild. It's wild to be doing it again. I didn't think it would ever happen. It's kind
Right.
of a miracle.
Yeah. And of course, this is the first album with a new lineup, new band. Like, of course, like being like two-thirds of the band lives in America and then the other two live in Austria. How does that sort of like affect sort of like the dynamic and the chemistry within Daath?
Um, I don't know. Like like we get along so well that I've always considered us to kind of have a European sound in the first place. And a lot of people are surprised to find out that we weren't a European band. So I don't know. Like I like how they think, and they're really great people. So it's it's not weird at all. Actually, there's no like weird culture stuff that I'm aware of. Um, these dudes are pros.
Yeah. And then of course with moving on with the terms of like the live show, like like because now you have like five albums out now. So how hard is it to like whenever you had like new albums like to put like a set list together, figuring out because you want those diehard fans that want songs from like the first albums. Like how do you like manage to find like a balance with everything?
Real quick, just so you know, I'm already late for my next interview, but so I'm gonna have to keep it quick. But in order to find the set list, man, that's a toughie. I'm gonna figure that out as we go along. So obviously there's songs we have to play that fans from the old days will be pissed if we don't play. So we're gonna cover all of those for sure. But I also think that because the new lineup this is their for four of them. This is their first album with us. Like that's their shit. I think that the band will sound best with the new stuff. Uh, so I think it'll probably be down the middle.
All right.
I mean, people have like sometimes people are not into a band's new stuff. So, but that hasn't been the case here. The with this, what I've noticed is that the old school Daath fans really, really like the new stuff. And when we've polled fans and been like, "What songs do you want to hear live?" Um, they the new songs are right up there with the old songs. So that's a relief that we're going to be able to play a lot of new songs without pissing off our fans.
Yes. So thank you, AL, for this interview. It was great to be able to have you on. Is just anything else with Daath you'd like to promote, and maybe we can get a hometown show in Atlanta soon?
I would love to play in Atlanta as soon as possible. As far as promoting, yeah, just the record comes out on the 3rd of May. You can go to dothofficial.com to pre-order it. And really, I just want to give a shout out to all the fans who stuck with us through the hiatus because without them hitting me up every day, I don't think that we'd be doing this right now. So shout out and thank you.
Awesome. So everybody, AL Levy from Daath. See you next time.